Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you once again to day 2 of the Doha Forum. We pick it up where we left off yesterday with discussions about the importance of dialogue and the state of multilateralism as we look at innovative ways to prevent the next crisis, the next war, the next tragedy. At a time when our global system and its key international organization, the United Nations, is quite frankly failing to put an end to the ongoing assault on Gaza and its civilian population. At a time when the UN has failed to live up to the preamble of its own charter, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Can the institution that was established following the devastation of 2 world wars save us from the dangers of World War III? Can it represent the aspirations of all 193 member states of the UN General Assembly, or will it continue to dance to the tune of the 5 permanent members of its Security Council? Our opening panel this morning is in partnership with the Munich Security Conference under the heading Taking the Stand, Strengthening International Humanitarian Law and Accountability. Now, of course, none of us here today need reminding about the multitude of conflicts and wars, new and old, in the world today, from Ukraine to Sudan, from Yemen to Myanmar, and of course, from Gaza to Lebanon. Civilian lives are being devastated with very little consequence for the perpetrators of these crimes. Will the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice be able to rise to the occasion and shake off the political pressures that for too long and so often stand in the way of international justice and accountability? All these questions and more will be addressed in our next session. But first, we begin with a keynote speech by someone who has his work cut out for him as president of the biggest global assembly in the world, the UN General Assembly. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage His Excellency Philemon Yang, who is former Prime Minister of Cameroon and the current president of the UN General Assembly.
Good morning. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in a world fractured by conflict, the importance of upholding international humanitarian law cannot be overstated. At its core, international humanitarian law establishes a framework of rules to protect lives and preserve dignity even when there is war. The Geneva Conventions are the cornerstone of this framework. The original Geneva Convention of 1864 marked a historic milestone. Since then, international humanitarian law has grown to incorporate treaties and protocols that regulate the conduct of war and mitigate its devastating effects. The 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the additional protocols represent a codified commitment to safeguarding human dignity in times of armed conflict. However, as we mark the 75th anniversary this year, we are confronted with the crude reality of ever-growing levels of impunity during conflict, during war. Excellencies, today over 120 conflicts rage across the globe, often accompanied by violations of international humanitarian law and immense human suffering. In 2023 alone, the United Nations recorded at least 34,443 civilian deaths in armed conflicts, a 72% increase from 2022. The proportion of women killed in armed conflicts doubled, while that of children tripled. The targeting of civilians and critical infrastructures, including hospitals, has been increasingly normalized. That has been made to look ordinary. In Gaza, where medical and humanitarian needs grow more desperate by the hour, health facilities are besieged and health and humanitarian workers are killed. Beyond the Middle East, conflicts in Ukraine, Sudan, Haiti, and elsewhere underscore the devastating consequences of violations of international humanitarian law. This cannot be allowed to continue, for even wars have rules. Those rules must be respected. Excellencies, in the Pact for the Future, nations, all nations, reaffirm their commitment to protecting civilians in armed conflicts. Accordingly, we must intensify efforts to strengthen mechanisms that prevent violations of international humanitarian law and hold perpetrators, wherever they might be, accountable. This requires integrating international humanitarian law into domestic legal systems, criminalizing grave breaches, training armed forces, and fostering its public understanding. We must also promote the universal ratification of key treaties, particularly the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions. Disseminating knowledge of international humanitarian law to all parties in conflict is equally vital. Our collective influence must foster compliance, prevent violations, and address breaches decisively. To advance this agenda, I will convene a high-level thematic debate on human dignity in armed conflict in January 2025. This event will aim to reinforce adherence to international humanitarian law and reaffirm the centrality of humanity in all our efforts, wherever we do anything and in all places. Excellencies, we must not reduce international humanitarian law to an empty slogan. That would be unfortunate. By upholding international humanitarian law, we save lives, preserve human dignity, and increase the likelihood of peace. I call on all nations to take decisive action to ensure respect for international humanitarian law and thereby uphold the principles of humanity even in the most trying times. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, President of the General Assembly, for setting the stage so well for our next session. May I now introduce all the panelists and invite them to the stage, starting with the President of the Republic of Namibia, His Excellency Nangolo Mumba. May I also call on the Minister of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed bin Abdulaziz Al Khulaifi. could we also please welcome the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, Ambassador Roger Carstens. Up next, please welcome the President and CEO of the International Crisis Group, Dr. Comfort Iro. And last but not least, our moderator, Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Ambassador Christoph Huesgen. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's, of course, a great pleasure and honor for the Munich Security Conference to be partner of the Doha Forum, and it's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to have the chance to moderate this very important debate. And we heard by the President of the General Assembly this plea for the respect for international humanitarian law. Thank you very much for this very strong statement. And let me start, if I may, with you, President Mbumba. At this year's UN General Assembly, you called for action on the International Court of Justice opinion on the war in Gaza. But more broadly, how, also having in mind what just the President of the General Assembly said and what he's planning for as a debate in January, how should we strengthen the authority of the international courts?
Thank you very much. Excellencies, honorable delegates. Maybe I should start first to thank the leadership and the people of Qatar for organizing this meeting and inviting us. Second, to say that yesterday, here at this same hall, we witnessed the 6 journalists who were invited here. One of them, she did not even have her legs. And really, I know we politicians quarrel with journalists all the time. It's normal. But for me to witness that somebody lost their limbs, and it's because a decision was taken by a political leader, or whatever country, to destroy. And I'm reminded from my earlier years as a refugee. I have lived in refugee tents. For refugee tents to be attacked, first of all, you leave your country or you leave your home, you are living somewhere else, you are living in fragile places, and you are being attacked. And we still call ourselves to be leaders with hearts. It is terrible. And therefore, the institutions we should depend on, as the President of the General Assembly has said, we have the institutions, we have the laws. We continue to talk about them, but we continue to violate them at the same time. Somebody once said that what we need now is truly, we no longer have leadership in the world. Each one of us are pulling in our own directions. And as long as we continue to pull in our own directions, we are dividing and breaking apart the laws, the programs, the institutions that should protect us. And unfortunately, or most likely, these violations are being done by people on all continents. There is no continent which can say we are clean. Europe used to be the proudest one. You can't claim that anymore. Africa used to be the bad child of the world. We are improving, but we also have our own situation. Sudan is one of them. We have big Sudan, and then 2 Sudan, and then the bigger part of the remaining Sudan is fighting each other. Till when are we doing that? So The issue of the Middle East, especially of Gaza, is truly devastating. This is the place where religion started. Where are our religions? What religion gives us the power to kill other human beings and get away with it? Which one? Tell me, which one? And as long as we have a situation, somebody saying, I destroyed a hospital, because underneath the hospital, there is a tunnel of the people I want to defeat or kill. And yet, the same authority is controlling the air, is controlling the borders, is controlling the coast, but does not want to see even people hiding underneath their own houses. Which authority, religious, moral, traditional, give us that right to say that as long as I'm following you, if somebody is running from wherever and he enter this building, then it does not matter. This building must be destroyed. So let us go back. Let us continue to think deep in our hearts. Let us not think that, okay, as the American will put it, I will not put it in American language. If somebody is bad and has caused trouble, we all agree that that person has committed a crime. But then we ask ourselves, whose bad kid is he? Is he our bad kid or other people's bad kid? The American English is much more colorful. And then we say, no, he has done something wrong, but he is our bad kid. We should protect him. We are protecting criminals. We are protecting criminals. And we are friends of criminals, but we are scared of telling them that they are committing crime. And as long as we continue to tell them, so every country and every leader in the world should stand up and tell, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And of all crimes, the crime of killing people must stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. The crime of killing people must stop. Thank you for this. Minister of State, you studied law. You were representing your country in the International Court of Justice. And having in mind what the President just said, and having in mind also what happened during the last days, the end probably of President Assad in Syria. According to reports, he has been flown out to the Emirates, if that is true. Talking about killing people, the crimes that were committed through Assad and his leadership were horrible. There was at the UN established the international impartial instrument for international impartial and independent mechanism, IIIM, where you have all the crimes committed during Assad's time were all now written down, registered. This IIIM mechanism is there. Now, Assad apparently is in the Gulf countries, in the Emirates, where who is signatory to the Rome Statute. Do you see that accountability will take place? How do you think that, being member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, you can contribute to that impunity for these horrible crimes that have committed will not take place?
Thank you so much, Christoph, for this important point that you have raised. And first of all, I'm delighted to see this strong cooperation that we're having with the Munich Security Conference. This is a new way of cooperating between institutions that are very much interested in expanding our, not only the reach out, but I think our voices to very critical topics that touched base the whole globe agenda. Part of my background, being a professor of law for years and now at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I realized that law means nothing without enforcement. If there is no a clear enforcement mechanism that applies directly what the law's mandate states to follow, then it's going to be only ink on paper. And what we have seen, unfortunately, that the international humanitarian law has clearly illustrated through treaties and international convention, as was illustrated previously by His Excellency the President of the United Nations General Assembly, that needs to be implemented by all states. And there are some judicial and non-judicial way of resolving conflicts and illustrating, putting those obligations into practice. And one of those institutions at the judicial level is the ICJ, is the International Court of Justice, and as well what we call by the ICTs, which is the International Criminal Tribunals. Both have a clear mandate of ruling over cases that will be presented to them. However, the missing component is who would implement those rulings after issuance. And one of the clear mandates under the United Nations Charter is Article 94 that clearly mandates the United Nations Security Council to play this role directly. Now, you know and I know that we're facing several challenges under the United Nations Security Councils. We're extremely disappointed by the role that the Council has been taking to deal with those different conflicts. But we understand also that there are some aspects that should not be in that legal and purely judicial process, some of which may relate to geopolitical considerations by the Council itself to take a specific decision. And this goes all under the umbrella of an old topic that has been under the reform of the United Nations Security Council that touched base on ideas that the Council needs to be more effective on. And again, fulfilling that specific part, which is enforcement and accountability under international humanitarian law, would not happen and would not exist without a clear implementation mechanism under the UN system that will provide that enforcement body with the authorities to implement that. Syria is a very good example that you're referring to. And we've been in this case for years, back and forth in different international organizations. And unfortunately, we reached levels where the people who's committed those crimes are running away. And therefore, that demands from all of us really to rethink and reassess those processes. And it applies in Syria today, it may apply in other areas around the globe. And therefore, it's important for us to continue this assessment. In terms of our positions with Syria, we've been very clear since day one that we're fully supporting the political process under United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254, and we are fully moving towards a more systematical but also procedural steps that will provide stabilities, preserve the unity, and the territorial integrity of the Syrian people. The conflict is between the Syrian regime and the Syrians themselves, not between Syria and other countries. And therefore, we're fully supporting any pathway that will provide resolutions towards those issues. We've seen in the last 74 hours and even more the changes on the ground. That will demand a further engagement by all of us. Yesterday, last night, I was in a meeting with the group of the foreign ministers of the Arab nations, as well as countries of the Astana process, agreeing specifically on that point. We need to integrate, we need to get involved on those important issues that provide stabilities, not only for Syria, but we're considering also the stability of the whole region in general.
No, thank you, and thank you for assuming this regional responsibility. Again, let me repeat, for the prevention of this violation of international humanitarian law, it's very important that accountability takes place, that those who committed these crimes are actually brought to justice to prevent others then to follow the example. Roger, you are looking into a specific, also horrible challenge that you have, and this is taking hostages. And what is the state of wrongful detainees in conflict zones around the world? And what should international accountability for conflict parties who engaged in arbitrary or wrongful detentions look like?
Thank you for that question. I also would like to thank Qatar for hosting this incredible panel, and it's an honor to be up here with these distinguished guests and before your excellencies. And thank you also, Ambassador, for moderating. The answer to the question is that there is now I would say, an effort to achieve accountability and deterrence with regards to the arbitrary detention of our citizens. In the United States specifically, we've tried to work on what you might call a toolkit that allows us to apply elements of national power to isolate diplomatically and economically those nation states that would take our citizens hostage. So we look at the tools that we might use across the areas of diplomacy, financial tools, economic tools, legal tools, but even though we've succeeded to some extent by the use of sanctions and visa restrictions against the individuals who might take people hostage, we realize that this is an international problem and we can't solve this alone. So we've been working with other countries, I would say following the leadership of Canada, who in 2021 introduced the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention and State-to-State Relations, of which, by the way, 79 countries have signed. But we've been working with the Canadian-led effort to expand it. We've been working to build a coalition of countries that are willing to work together to raise the cost against those nation states that would take our citizens hostage. And while we've achieved some success, we still think that we're a few years away from perhaps deterring this. So in our mind, accountability and deterrence go hand in hand. Along with these nation states that we've been working with in this coalition, we've had a chance to meet at the UN General Assembly in last September. We have regular meetings in Washington, D.C., or the capitals of the nations that are participating, and we're really trying to find a way that allow us to raise the cost against these countries. Additionally, we've been working with the independent panel on arbitrary detention. It's an esteemed group of jurists, 7 in all, that are taking a look at the existing legal mechanisms that are out there that might be used against the taking of our citizens. It's making progress. It owes a report back to the body I want to say February of 2025, and we'll take the recommendations very seriously and see if there are ways that we all can progress to take a look at those existing legal mechanisms. But additionally, we're also working with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, a body that has rendered judgments, for example, against Russia in the case of Evan Gershkovich, some of our American citizens who were taken in Venezuela, for example. And that's a very important body. It's very important, we think, to have international bodies declare that this is a wrongful thing to do, and it provides, I'd say, the necessary wherewithal to allow us to start taking action. Following up what the minister said, you can say something, but you actually have to start taking concrete actions in order to make this issue go away. I would say that the hard part is trying to change the calculus, we believe, of the nations that do this. If there's a country that systemically takes our citizens arbitrarily, how do you get them to stop doing that? And what we found is that the constant use of sanctions may not be enough. It's going to take that coalition to come together to get it done, and it's probably going to take a few years. As Secretary Blinken said when he asked us to look at this problem, it might take 10 to 12 years to get it done, but we have to start someplace, and building a coalition is going to be the best way to do it. I would say aside from the coalition, I can tell you that within the United States, there are citizens now that are taking nation states to court. We've had Americans who are former detainees held in Iran that now have judgments against the country of Iran to make right what happened to them when they lost years of their lives. And the United States Congress is now looking at passing legislation that would allow them to declare states as sponsors of arbitrary detention. But really, when you ask the question, where are we right now? The train has left the station. It may only be going 30 kilometers an hour, but there is movement. We are starting to make progress, but sadly, we're still probably years away from having a strong, robust coalition that can raise the price so that this horrible practice eventually goes away.
No, thank you very much. Roder, you have been engaged under several administrations on this topic, very important, and thanks for your leadership and looking after that, that big challenge that we are facing. Comfort, I would love to pick your brain. I mean, the International Crisis Group is looking every year at the most important crisis, so I was wondering what we are thinking when you're following the news that one of the worst humanitarian crisis, well, in Syria, is taking this abrupt change. But I also want to ask you on another crisis that was mentioned by the President of the General Assembly, and that is Sudan. Sudan, a country where we have today the worst humanitarian crisis, more than 10 million refugees, and there you have a lot of non-state actors. And what do you think, what has to be done, can be done to also prevent non-state actors from committing crimes against humanity, and what can we do against those responsible for this horrible humanitarian catastrophes as we see them in Sudan?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be a partner of Qatar in running the Doha Forum, and thank you very much for this important session as well, because in the era of impunity, it's important that we are able to confront these issues straight on. I mean, the interesting thing about Sudan, Christoph, is that about 10 years ago or so began the mechanism. The long arm of justice was put on Sudan in the form of the ICC, and the Security Council was the custodian of trying to manage and deal with the accountability issues in Sudan, and that was very much targeted and aimed at the President, Bashir, at the time. And the African Union, in fact, never, or a number of heads of states never imagined that the long arm of justice would target a head of state. But fast forward, because you're talking about contemporary affairs now in Sudan, and particularly with the Rapid Support Force and General Hemeti as well. I mean, there have been certain steps that have been taken, sanctions, travel bans, various instruments have been leveled on both sides of the crisis, and particularly him. But this is not having what you refer to as the deterrent effect. This is not preventing or rolling back atrocities, which therefore raises a number of conundrums about what is the effectiveness and usefulness of these instruments if they're not able to alter facts on the ground. If the various fighting forces, whether it's the Sudanese armed forces or the paramilitaries or the other militia groups, are not able to change their tactics, they're not able to cease fire, they're not able to pause and come to the table, then it throws into question the viability of these various instruments and institutions. And is it a surprise? Because a number of these actors, whether non-state or state actors, are looking at across the world, looking at other arenas. I mean, we've talked about Gaza, we can talk about Ukraine. They're looking at a number of serious examples and seeing, quite frankly, that they can get away with it because they see the inconsistency in which these accountability measures are being applied in a number of arenas. They see that they can use military force willingly. They see that they can apply a degree of atrocious crimes, atrocities, and still manage to stay in power. They see that there are a number of other states that are heavily reliant on them for their various national interests, and continue to help them to fuel their war, because they see that these paramilitary forces or other armed forces are useful commodities, useful mercenaries, useful actors in other countries. So is it a surprise that you have these two forces that have a long lifeline in Sudan? 20 years ago, Sudan, what was happening in Darfur was labeled a genocide. You know, and here we are 20 years later with a new, well, not new cast of characters, the same cast of characters, and looking and recognizing that despite these various mechanisms, they have been able to continue to fuel their war. So we have to ask ourselves about the legitimacy, the viability, and the effectiveness of these instruments in the midst of sort of other geopolitical headwinds. Now, I'm not suggesting, however, that all is lost, because I think the key for civilians also is to making sure that we're able to keep the door to justice opened, if not for today, but for tomorrow. So it's important what's already been put in place in Sudan. But quite frankly, I think the message that Sudanese are seeing, other countries are seeing, is that we can get away with it because the key countries that can stop us in our paws are also applying justice willy-nilly whenever it suits them, and ignoring it when it suits them as well.
No, thank you for that again. It is so important that people who commit these horrible crimes don't have the feeling that they can get away with it. And this is again for me to repeat what I said before. The mechanism was set up, the IIIM for Syria. It is so important, and Assad also with his the horrible crimes committed also has to face justice. Mr. President, you are looking back at a long period as president. Namibia has been very strong also in the UN, as supportive UN. You and my country, Germany, were drafting the declaration that was adopted at the UN on the summit for the future. And I think that was a very good cooperation. Comfort Aero just mentioned Sudan and the horrible crisis there. When you look back, and as an African leader, when Africa always claims African solutions to African problems, how frustrated are you when you see in Sudan, when you see in Somalia, when you see in the Sahel, all these horrible suffering of people, that African solutions are not there yet? What is your message to your successor, to the next generation of African politicians? How do you, how can you prevent these atrocities from continuing to happen?
Once again, thank you very much. Namibia prides itself as a child of the international community, midwifed by the United Nations. And if we decide one day to create another institution and leave the UN, I think Namibia will still be the last to leave the UN. That we believe in that. We believe in its ability, the way it was structured, to help save humanity. Now, we are facing really problems. Namibia gained her independence in 1990. And we were the last, among the last, the very last of the colonies. And we were hopeful that now, for the first time, we are going to live in the world of peace, world of stability. No quarrels, no fighting, no border issues. Our aim should be to develop our society, train our people, create hospitals, build our roads, and under the African Union, create a continental unity that can solve all these problems. As it was said by others, here we are. Problems continue. Problems are even getting worse. Uh, my appeal is each country and each leadership and each people for that matter must take a stand against violation of human rights, against creating excuses why we have to do criminal activities, why we have to hang to power by foul means, by violent means. And therefore, there is no one solution. We in Africa too lack the caliber of Julius Nyerere of their time, the Kenneth Kaundas of their time, the Agustino Netos of their time, the Sam Nuyomas of their time. We lack them. And it's not because there are no people. It's a dedication to duty, dedication to unity of our own countries and the unity of our neighborhood within SADC, the neighborhood of the African continent and in the world. So we will continue to believe, we will continue to support, we will continue to engage. That's why we are grateful to be here in Qatar. It is not because of the size, it's not because of the large population, but the wisdom and the will to contribute to the welfare of humanity as a whole. If we all continue to do that, then we can continue to solve problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. State Minister, in your previous remark, you highlighted, on the one hand, the need for the Security Council, for the international community to take care of the challenge of accountability. At the same time, you also pointed to the lack of ability for the P5 to get together. Now, the President of Namibia just said that each and individual state also carries responsibility. Let me ask you, when we come to impunity, when we come to the need for accountability for crimes against humanity, war crimes, etc., if on the international level there is no possibility, how about national levels? How about non-state actors that have committed crimes being prosecuted by national courts? Is this something that you believe is important? We have the principle of universality. In Germany, we actually tried some of those who committed horrible crimes in Syria. They were prosecuted in a German court. Is this something you believe should be universal? Is this something that you are considering for your country?
100%, in a short answer. Definitely, I believe that there is a big responsibility for states in this important topic. Christoph, the international humanitarian law was designed not to protect the legal provisions, but to protect the humanity. And if countries and states are not taking up that responsibility and taking all measures needed to protect and preserve those international principles, then unfortunately we will remain in a situation where, as you said, the wrongdoer will run away and no accountability system will apply. And therefore, I think it's extremely important, and I will mention just a few points. As I mentioned to you, I'm a former lawyer, I'm a mediator, so my mind functions always as a problem solver, and trying to find solutions for every difficult crisis. And we've been passing by a very difficult crisis in the states of Qatar's 25 years of experience in the field of mediation, dealing with the most complex and difficult cases globally. Three things to take into consideration. The first one is a point that my dear friends, Roger, who I enjoy working with and partnering with in several cases in my work at the ministry, has mentioned a very critical point, is our assessments to the tools that applies on those situations. My dear friends, Roger has mentioned the sanction. Is the sanctions always effective to be the only tool, or should we consider other alternative tools that may also have an impact? One of the alternative tools, which is the opposite of sanctions, is incentives. A program, a solid program that will provide incentives for states and individuals that will help and assist the implementations of the ICJ rulings, the ICTS, the International Criminal Tribunal's rulings, and other important principles at the higher level. Therefore, we need to think of the alternatives as well and explore other options that may add a huge value to the contribution of this objective. A second point to mention, and you referred it to clearly, Christoph, is the issue of the regional role. But I will go even beyond that to the regional organizations. All of those regional organizations have a bigger duty as well to work towards helping and assisting the implementations of those international rulings, such as African Union, European Union, the organizations of the American states, the OIC, the Arab Leagues, many regional organizations. They need to take up that responsibility and help and assist what is missing in the international, what we call the international gap, to fulfill that main objective. And last but not least, the spark of the war, because we're talking about international humanitarian law, which the law that applies at a period of war, the spark of that war started in a conflict. So for us to go back in time and start working on alternative dispute mechanism that will allow us to preserve and help the areas from getting into a military clashes and a war is something that is extremely important. That's a mandate that Qatar has put in itself for more than 25 years. We're working in the field of mediation. We will continue to work towards the peacemaking process regionally and internationally in those different cases. And therefore, I think those three ideas can be explored further again. And these are not new ideas. This has been discussed several times in different platforms. But I think it's crucial for us not to miss the alternatives that will help us to reach that level. Lastly, on the points of regional, absolutely I agree with you. Regional dimension when it comes to countries taking up that responsibilities. We applaud the initiatives that Germany's been doing by allowing and accessing their judicial system to rule on matters that possibly one way or another relate to international actors and international states. This is something that is extremely important. We highly encourage the judicial process to be strengthened at the regional levels, but has a bigger impact on the international level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Roger, you are one of the few officials that has been appointed by President Trump, and you kept your office during President Biden, and so you are above the parties there a bit. And can I ask you on the US and the stance of the United States with regard to accountability? The United States has reacted pretty severely in the past against the International Criminal Court, and the former officials of the court were became persona non grata in the US, and as I said, there is a critical stand. How do you see this? You know, as somebody coming from a country that has a very dark past, we were told after the Second World War, from now onwards, you Germans, you go by the rule of law. And when you see now our godfather US being so critical on international law and on accountability on these courts that have been praised here, what are your thoughts about it, and what are your predictions about the United States also adhering to international mechanisms of justice and accountability?
I don't know if does this work over there? This is usually you say thank you for that question. This one, I'm not sure I'm going to thank you for that. You know, it's what I would say, and I'll be quick because I know the clock's running short, and I want to make sure you get another question. What I would say, probably the only non-lawyer up here, is that I know my country does believe in accountability. I've seen that in action in 24 years of service in the military, my time at the U.S. Department of State. There are disagreements that we often have at very high levels as to what mechanism might be best to enforce justice when it comes to our own national interests. But I think overall, you're going to find that if it comes to a matter of whether something's just or not, we're going to be at the table. We're going to have these discussions. I don't think the doors ever close. And so whether it's the ICC or another legal mechanism, if we're not to sign on to it, you can at least sure we're going to show up at the table and give you our opinion and see if we can work towards something that makes sense. So a way that may not be a satisfying answer, and I would love to be a little more, I'd love to make sure I'm scratching that itch. What I can say is that we're going to be good partners in justice and accountability, but we at times do have to work towards something that, with our international interests, makes sense. So, did I skate that question well enough?
Well, I was, when I asked the questions, I wondered if I were American, how I would respond to it. So it was a tough question. Now, I don't want to give a final word because time is running out. I want you, Comfort, to say final words with 3 sentences because we have the president of Senegal here and I don't want to take time from him. Comfort, the final words, and I would like to thank everybody else on the podium. Comfort, you have the final say.
No, thank you. I'll complete Roger's sentence as well. In the end, I think the message is that it's also down to the policy preferences of countries and states. And in this instance, we've seen in the last 18 months where there's been clarity, even at the domestic level of your legal instruments, the policy preference has overridden those legal frameworks that you do have that you could use within the parameters of the United States, regardless of the international treaties as well. Look, Christophe, I do want to underline one issue, that although, yes, there's a sense in which we are living in an era of impunity, there was one thing that you said, and I think our friends also said it, is that the importance also at the end of the day is to keep that door and a sense that there will be justice, if not today, but that it will be there later. And that is the lesson that I take away from Colombia, from Sierra Leone, from Liberia, even in Sudan, and in what is, and ultimately, hopefully, but the script has been written currently for Gaza. But we shouldn't overlook the decision of a number of states in relation to the ICJ ruling, in relation to occupied Palestinian territories as well. I think that's important. I think we shouldn't overlook the important decision that was been taken by the ICC. There was a moment in time when we felt that this instrument had run its course. And we shouldn't also forget, Mr. President, you were alluding to it yourself, the African Union itself had a more forward-leaning, progressive sensing of international justice through its own Article H of the Constitutive Act as well. In response to what it labeled Western judicial imperialism, it came up with its own response to international criminal law as well. So I think we should cling on to those despite the atrocities and the violations that we're seeing every day, and to make sure that we do keep that door open and sense that there will be a day where we can deal with justice as well. So on that note, Christophe, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists. Thank you to the chairman of the Munich Security Conference for moderating this discussion and for touching on so many important issues that keep nagging at us year after year with every new and recurring conflict in the world. The key issue of justice, as we heard it said so often on this panel, justice and accountability. Can we